Okay, so this next dream then, it continues very well actually on from the one I think I called Not So United Nations. I think it follows on quite well. And that will become apparent as we go through. So this dream was from the 16th of the 10th, 2025. So I've actually filmed 3 other dreams that happened that night. And this is going to be a couple of dreams, I believe. So a couple? Yeah, a couple of dreams. There's 5 in one night, which is unusual. It's very unusual. But this one then, how this starts then. So I put here initially another house party sort of thing. It wasn't really, but again, that will become apparent very soon. So the venue that I was at here felt like it was one set up by young elites, is what I listed here. So the property was in a pretty expensive residential area. However, I only noticed that later in the dream when I was actually leaving that was the case. I had been invited with some friends, specifically, I won't name the names because it's not really that relevant apart from one of the names, but I'll mention that when it comes up anyway. Probably some others, but let's just say my group of friends. My group of friends is who were there. We all met up at this venue and we were chatting around tables upstairs along with many others, obviously other people that we didn't know. You know, it's just a venue that we were at. And I remember the floor being totally glass front. Oh, okay. I just thought about the front of this venue was all glass fronted, because I remember actually when I was on the outside, I was looking up and I could see people's feet, people sitting at tables and stuff like that. So the whole of the front was glass. Yeah, me saying the floor was glass kind of made that a bit confusing, didn't it? But no, it was the actual front was glass. And this could be noticed, yeah, from ground level. Where are we? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, anyway, across us was another table and there were some young kids, young boys who actually thought that my mate Dan, who was there, was actually some sort of like famous footballer, so soccer player, or some other kind of sport. I'm pretty sure it was, well, I think it was football, something like that anyway. But they thought that he was this famous guy and they were asking for his signature. And we were all kind of sniggering, obviously being his friends, because we knew he wasn't a celebrity and that they were completely mistaken of who they thought he was. But Dan he was playing along, providing these 2 brothers with with his signature. So on reflecting on the venue, yeah, there you go. So it wasn't a house party. It was more like a bar or a pub sort of thing. That was sort of in amongst. I do mention this. In amongst a residential estate. So initially, I thought that we were at a house party or something like that because I was aware that I was in a kind of like a house. But that's what a pub is. A pub is a public house. So it's just literally a house that's been converted into a venue for people to go and socialise and drink alcohol. That's what a pub is. So this was in a residential estate, very similar. But it looked a lot more upmarket. As I said, glass fronted. You just don't see that with pubs. You see that with bars in cities and towns and stuff, but not so much. Not so much pubs. They're just really, as I said, houses that have been converted into that kind of venue. So I think maybe rather than me getting like a party invite as such, it was just my mates, telling me, my friends asking me just to turn up at this place, invited by them. There was a bit prior to all of this as well, so I've kind of jumped straight into me being at the venue, but there was a bit of me actually getting to the venue. So prior to arriving at this venue, there was this, I was racing in my car, like I was following a track, maybe a navigation or something like that, to actually get to this venue. That said, I don't remember racing any other cars as such, so maybe it was me, I was just in a hurry to arrive at this venue, but I was racing around very, very fast to get there, and I'm pretty sure that under this bar, there was like an underground go-kart track or something like that, but it wasn't go-karts, it was actual cars that were racing around. But yeah, I remember us. So when we were up in this bar bit where I was around my friends, there's one of my friends that I was actually talking about the cars that she had owned previously, because she was one of our friends who learned to drive really quickly. So she was one of the first with cars, and I remember I got a lift in her car a few times, but it was just that we were kind of reminiscing on the cars that she's had and that I had now versus the cars that we have now, and that she was discussing how what we were discussing mainly was engine size, speed, etc., and how she had a more powerful car than me at the time. Is what we were sort of talking about while we were upstairs, and we were talking, around this table with the kids that just asked for a signature. These cards were being passed around, so they're almost like business cards, pieces of card of some sort. I think that they would just happen to be there, and but Dan had actually signed a couple of these, and that's what I think he had passed to the kids. So that's where he had his signature on there. But others in my group started actually drawing pictures on these cards instead. And they were really, really basic. So I put like really childlike pictures. And I remember seeing that they were very, very mocking stuff towards Jesus, which I knew had come from my friends. So these were just circulating, basically. These were circulating around. And I came across one of them and I was like, brilliant, a childish picture. And I knew that it had come from my friends. And it caused, I put on here, it caused my heart to sink. And I decided if they were going to insult Jesus like that, then I just wouldn't hang out with them. So I decided that without saying anything, once I saw these cards and stuff like that, I just thought, right, I'm just going. See ya. And I didn't actually say anything. I just left. So I left without saying goodbye. When I got outside, I noticed that it was now very, very dark. So when I'd arrived, it was daytime, I guess, coming into dusk. Given the time that we're meeting up, it's probably going to be getting dark. But when I left, it was now dark. Whereas as before, it had been light when I'd arrived. This was when it was clearer to me that it was in a housing estate, because again, now I've seen it from the outside. So this is when I get that understanding. And I put maybe because I arrived, in the way I arrived, racing there and stuff like that. I think I parked my car. I said about this area that was underneath like a track or something. I think that's where I parked my car. So it was almost like an underground parking area or something like that. So actually, I didn't write this down, but in reading it this morning, it made me think, purely because we watched last weekend, so less than a week ago, we watched Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, which is the one, isn't it, where they're racing around inside a multi-story car park. So it kind of made me think of that. I was thinking, should I even mention that? Yeah. But I wondered whether it was something like that, maybe it had underground levels that kind of went down. So there's like a slope, I think, below this building, that from one side you couldn't see it, but from the other side, as I arrived, I could see this slope that went down into this, I think, a car park, or I said a go-kart track or something like that was down there. But it was really, at this point, it was clearer to me that it was a housing estate that we were actually in. Maybe because when I arrived, I didn't explore the area at all. I was just getting there in a hurry. And I had I'd only just left this area. And when I was looking back at the venue, I noticed obviously all the lights on, flashing lights, music booming and stuff like that. And I noticed it was more of a bar sort of scenario as I'd walked across the road. As I walked across the road, though, I heard this really loud noise coming from somewhere. And what I heard was a girl screaming. And it was basically the kind of scream that's just a pure terror scream, the kind of thing that you see in horror movies, screaming of somebody being tortured. Literally a torture scream is what I would describe it as. And due to all the loud music, the cars and all this that was going on, it kind of completely masked this noise that was going on. It was only really when I got outside I could hear all this, and it's incredibly loud. Like in the street, everybody would have been able to hear it, but inside you couldn't hear it. There was just too much noise. What did I put here? Due to all the loud music, I didn't hear any of what was going on. I was aware that the venue was owned by some rich people. I put potentially late teens, or quite young adults, let's say, maybe. And I remember one of them was specifically Russian. This is where we get this weird connection with what I've just gone through in my previous dream, which was talking about Russia. That was in the torpedo one, wasn't it? And also to do with the UN dream as well. So I didn't actually do that on purpose. I only realised that now. When I read it after I'd filmed it, I noticed, oh yeah, there's Russians in this as well. Isn't that weird? It wasn't planned. These have just come together in this way. Very, very strange. I think, yeah, one of them was Russian, I think, and clearly the money was not from legal means that actually put this bar together and stuff like that. And there was one of these guys, as I said, one of them being Russian. He was the one who was actually terrorizing this woman upstairs, where no one actually could access or was invited to. So it's like a closed off room, basically. And I didn't know what to do. So standing outside in the dark, hearing all this screaming, and I couldn't place exactly where it's coming from. And I really felt for her, obviously, but I didn't do anything, because I didn't know, like in around all of these buildings I'm surrounded by, I couldn't quite place what floor is it on, which building is it, because it was actually separate from that building that we're all in. It was another building, I think, that was next to it. But again, I couldn't really place where it's coming from. And I don't know what I would do even if I got in there, But yeah, as I said, I really felt for her. I didn't do anything. I ended up going home, just walking. And the dream then picks up with me being at home. So it's like that night's finished, and then I'm in the morning, I guess. And picks up with me being at home. But I was actually in my 20s for the previous part of obviously this dream when I was meeting up with my friends. But now I'm at my current age. Okay. So I found out obviously, I found out my youngest daughter was aware of this Russian teenage guy. So he must have been a teen then, I guess. This teenage guy, and this youngish guy had found out that she had taken some pictures. I'm not sure where this was, because obviously I didn't see her in the venue because I was in my 20s, so she wouldn't have even been born yet. So I was seeing myself as in my 20s with my friends, drinking, all that sort of stuff. But in this bit, I don't know quite where the connection is, but yeah, my youngest daughter was aware of this guy, this Russian teen. She'd been taking some pictures, and I'm assuming it was at this party, this bar or something, but again, it doesn't quite tally up. But he was actually billing her for every photo that she'd taken. I was like, what's this all about? It wasn't a massive amount, but I mean, if you took quite a lot of photos, it would be. It says here £1 to £1.50. So I suppose we're talking about somewhere around about less than $2 and over $1, let's say, as to how much it would be per photo. And I needed to pay for them. So it was like this Russian kid. It was like a mafia dude. He was a mafia teen in some way. So he was, interestingly, that matches in with Tokyo Drift, doesn't it? Where you've got this teenage kids, and obviously it's based in Japan, but there's a kid who's there working for the mafia, aren't they? I didn't even think about that. But yeah, that's a bit of a connection. So this mafia teen, there was messaging her to tell her this, and that she was just coming to ask me. So she was coming to me, her dad, to ask for some money to pay this guy off for all these photos that she'd actually taken. I said it says here they were very loose friends, more acquaintances. They knew each other, but they weren't friends. And as we printed off some of these photos of some of these just funny moments, I suppose, that had happened, that she'd taken pictures of, one of her friends was there. Again, I don't think that she's relevant, but she was there with us and my eldest daughter. We printed off all these pictures, only about 4 pictures that were printed off. But I noticed something in the room. So I noticed this small point of light. So it was like I saw a small point of light, that's on the right-hand side of the room. And it looked like just a very, very small point of light. And I went over to the window and I noticed there's actually a hole in the glass. And it was I put roughly half a centimetre. So what is that? I mean, that's difficult to even sort of demonstrate really on a picture on the camera, but half a centimetre is very small. Very, very small hole. And it was like it was perfectly cut, almost like with a glass cutter. Perfectly cut, round circle. No cracks around it, nothing. There was just this little cutout. But it caught my eye because obviously I'm actually seeing this light that's on the wall, and I'm thinking, what's that? Where's that coming from? Like looking around. But it was actually what caught my eye in looking through the hole in the window was it had actually caused a really strange cloud pattern. Very, very strange cloud pattern in the sky. And look, as I was looking, if you imagine, I'm looking through the hole like you would look through a keyhole, let's say. I'm looking through this hole and I'm seeing how it's whatever's come through this window, it's come through at such a rapid rate because it's actually caused the clouds to change. And what happens is it causes this kind of swirling of the clouds from this, where this hole is, like a bullet going through, and it kind of like sucks the air in, I suppose, and sort of swirls it. It was that kind of thing. And so I saw like the blueness of the sky, and then the white cloud was kind of like around the blueness where this thing had just flown through. And I basically put here, and I thought immediately, it was like, was this like a little meteorite or something that just kind of smashed through, but really cleanly, in that it didn't cause any cracking of the window, which is a bit strange. But yeah, smashed through the window and it dispersed the cloud in this way to create this kind of tunnel of cloud in the sky. Not only had this meteorite gone through the double glazed window, it also passed through the bedroom wall as well. So it's gone through that wall and the other and into the next room as well. So it'd gone through several walls, gone through windows, stuff like that. So it's clearly a meteorite, something like that, and I could see light coming through the bedroom wall, as it was not a light that was shining on it. It was the light that was coming through this hole, and it was a perfect circle, causing no damage to the glass or the wall, but was just like like a glass cutter had been used. So that's the end of that dream. So transparency. And I put, and this is a big one. Okay, so 2 nights ago, prior to this dream, I did watch the film Hancock. So that's which is where obviously you've got a superhero that actually uses his finger to cut through glass. Yeah, when he's in prison, he does like a little glass cutting thing with his finger, being a superhero. Also, he comes blasting in, flying in, causing damage. I put a lot like a meteorite. Last night I watched also the film called The Day the Earth Stood Still, which has perfect spheres that kind of cut out little areas, wherever these spheres that are kind of like an arc, basically, is what they are, which links nicely, almost nicely into the next one. But yeah, the arc thing, let's just say that comes up in the next video. So these little spheres, there we go, that save animals before judgment comes on the earth and stuff like that. But both of these could have obviously heavily influenced my dream. But that's just a little bit of a transparency bit. I'm going to go on to dream 5, and then I'm just going to do basically the dream 4 and dream 5 of that night. So 1 and 2 based on this video, of course. I'd go through the meaning all in one go, because there's somewhat of a continuation here. Very strange one, but somewhat of a continuation. So this is dream 5, or technically what we're filming here, dream 2. So this all has street dancing in it. So I was thrown into this, this street dancing thing while Trump was watching. So President Trump was watching us doing street dancing. And it wasn't just me, it was all modern dancing. So I put it's a little bit like the group Jungle. That's kind of very urban, isn't it? Sort of as far as the kind of style in all their videos and stuff like that. So it's very much like that, very, very much like that. Surprisingly, I was very good. I'm not in real life, obviously. the best in the group. I was actually I was in a league of my own when it came to this dancing. I was just so much better. I was actually kind of like leading the group to a certain extent, because they're all kind of looking at me and trying to copy some of the moves I was doing. Again, completely unlike reality. There was maybe 20 men, all part of this dance group. And it was kind of like it was almost like a talent competition, really. We weren't working together. We were all kind of trying to stand out and doing our dancing and stuff like that. But it was a very urban, concrete sort of environment as well at the same time. So it was literally like it was like a dance floor, basically. It was a big square that was outside. It was concrete, like paved, let's say. And there was all sorts of like shingle, pebbles sunk into concrete and stuff like that. It's just, again, we get that quite a bit in the UK. I don't know whether that's elsewhere, but a lot of pebbles we put into concrete just so it's not just concrete, kind of mixes it up a little bit. But it was that kind of environment, and I was kind of thinking, this is not the place to be doing this kind of stuff, because you obviously scuff your knees up and all sorts, and hands, doing all these kind of pretty full-on moves, but that's where we were doing it. And I was doing all these different sorts of dancing moves, very much like break dancing, doing flips. I think there's a bit where I ran up to a wall, and did that bit where you sort of jump up and kick off the wall and then do a backwards flip. I was doing all sorts of crazy stuff on this basically, and this outside dance floor. And I was doing way more challenging moves than anybody else that I was with. And I was really inventive, really creative, unlike the others. Well, as I said, I was in a league of my own, okay? After that, I actually left that environment and I actually went to someone's house. So I knocked on their door. Now, the person who this was, I think is relevant. I think it is relevant. And her name is Frances. I used to work with her, actually, long time ago now, Frances. And she actually wanted to accompany me, but she wanted to do more formal stuff like tango and foxtrot, that sort of stuff, which, and I put here, and there was also another person from the same work called Diane. So she was there as well. And I was discussing how boring I felt that type of dance was. Because obviously I've just been doing like all crazy flips and bits and pieces. I want to do something very, very formal. I wasn't really into it. Someone was talking about that's basically that interaction. It says someone was talking about their political party and that it was very similar to the opposition, and Trump being there was disappointed in this person's views on the party because it was nothing like the other party. So I suppose it was like saying Democrats and Republicans and saying, oh, they're both the same. And he was kind of like, we're not, we're very different, but this person thought they were very similar. I would have said with UK politics, it's not really that much difference. They've a lot of them have kind of converged to a certain extent. They don't really have that big separation as to where they used to be. But again, we're not going to get into politics. So I put here, President Trump was striving to change the country for the better. Again, I don't know what this country is. I'm assuming it means America here. I didn't really write it down. Again, I don't know where my location is really in this particular dream, but I would assume the UK, given that the other dream was based in the UK. So I think it's just a continuation, but President Trump has to be there, I guess, in this dream for some reason, but he's been in quite a few of my dreams. So Trump was striving to change the country for the better, but the feedback from this leader of a youth group, I think, something like that, was that his party was more or less the same as the opposition party. And he was kind of going, no, it's not. Not at all, but okay. So what were my thoughts? Well, I've got to find actually the dreams that I want to come off here, come off and start talking about. So it'd be dream 4 and 5, wouldn't it? Yeah, dream 4. Okay. So there's obviously racing aspects. I'm speeding to this venue. Okay, so that's, hopefully you haven't forgot what I was talking about already, but racing, speeding to this venue, going faster. So maybe this is talking about, maybe I'm going too fast, too faster than God would have me go, and maybe I should slow down a bit, because I have got that feedback actually in quite a few dreams. I do have a lot of dreams about cars. Not that I've had that many recently, really. But I was reading an old one actually. What was I doing? I think I was racing in a Ferrari F40. I was absolutely bombing it around. And it was something to do with a Ferrari F40. And then somebody parked up behind me and parked up in front of me. And I was kind of stuck. I wanted to get out and race around. But this big RV, sort of recreational vehicle sort of thing, parked up in front of me. And there was a car that parked behind me. It was almost like a police kind of, boxed me in. I was like, well, I can't actually go anywhere. And it was almost, again, I was debating whether to even write that down. I haven't got a clue where that is actually. So I was reading through all of my dream books, just looking for little bits that maybe I hadn't filmed in different series. That was one of them. And and I was just completely stuck. And it was like, well, again, if we're looking at the same sort of thing, it's almost like if that is related to my ministry, because a car can represent a ministry quite a bit. Maybe I just need to calm it down a bit. But this is an old dream. So does it mean it's for the present because I'm only mentioning it now, or does it mean at that time I needed to slow it down? I'm not sure. But that's that one. So racing around. I've had lots of dreams to do with, what was the other one I had? Where somebody stole my tyres. I had people stealing my tyres. where I noticed I was going around a roundabout, and I felt that it really banked hard to one left, onto my left-hand side as I was going around this roundabout. I was like, what's going on with this? And I took the car back, and the car had massive, like NASCAR, or more like kind of like, yeah, almost like big 4x4 wheels, really huge, chunky wheels. But they were bold. They didn't have any tread on them whatsoever. And I was kind of like, what does that mean exactly? And these, all of my standard tyres have been stolen in the night. And I got in the car, drove off, and I didn't really notice until I was going around this roundabout. And I felt it really, really pulling to one side. And I noticed that 3 of the wheels were all the same. There were these 4x4 kind of wheels that were all bold tread. And the left one was like really small, almost like a comical sort of one that a really small car would have. And it was just like so out of alignment with the other wheels. You know, if they were all the same tyres, then it would have driven okay. But it was purely because one of them was a really, really small wheel in comparison to the other 3. What that means, no idea. And I had another one once where I remember I was in a car park, and I was parking up at this kind of huge supermarket sort of thing. I said it was like a Costco or something like that. I just saw it as this huge supermarket thing. And I remember I handed my keys to like a valet to park my car, which was completely unnecessary. I was already parked up, but this valet guy said, "Oh, do you want me to park your car for you?" I was kind of like, "Well, I'm already parked, as you can see." But I gave him the keys, and I came out from this shop, wherever it was, came back to my car, and I went to drive off, and I realised it just wasn't moving much. I walked around to the front of the car, and it had like a steamroller. So the front 2 tyres had been replaced by a metal steamroller sort of front, and I couldn't really drive it because I couldn't turn. All I could do was go in a straight line, and I was kind of like, what does that mean? So these are all ones I haven't filmed because I just thought I don't really understand those. But I've had just so many about cars, tons of them, and as I said, I think it's talking about, you know, about what I've just said, you know, about slowing down. Maybe that front bit on there was just keeping me in a straight line, you know, stop going off all over the place, you know, keep in a straight line. Something like that, maybe. So as I said, I wasn't planning to add that in at all, but here we go. That happens in my videos a lot. So, yeah, so I was talking about racing car. Right, fine. So I was going too fast, faster than God would maybe have planned for me to go. That said, God knows the beginning to the end, so he already knew I was going to do that, but, you know. Anyway, so I do have many dreams about speeding cars, faulty cars. Yes, I have brake problems. I've had tyre problems, punctured tyres, all sorts of dreams. Had one where I got a parking ticket, I remember, and I was sort of having a moan about getting a parking ticket where I shouldn't have got a parking ticket. Couldn't understand it. All sorts of weird things I get about cars. But as it says here, I've heard this tends to represent ministry. I mean, yeah, it does. My dream book that I've got says that it represents cars, but I'd actually heard that, to be fair, from another YouTuber well over a year ago, way before I got my dream book, that it represented your ministry. So, okay, because I was having stacks of them at a time, and I thought, okay, how can I understand that then? Anyway, moving on. So Dan, do you remember Dan? So he was the friend who had these couple of kids who went up to him and said, we want your signature, because they thought he was famous. Okay. So what was he doing? Well, he was accepting worship, essentially, wasn't he? Because he was a celebrity, or thought he wasn't a celebrity, but he was accepting worship in the form of the kids are like, oh, look, it's this amazing sports star. It's not, but okay. As I said, we just kind of chuckled, thinking these kids thought that he was someone famous. But as I said, he's accepting worship from the kids by them having a false understanding of who he actually was, paralleled with an earlier dream in which, and how this paralleled, right, with an earlier dream this year that I had with Russell Brand, who was a celebrity, and in both the dreams I've had with him being a celebrity, he's been our friend, okay? And again, watch those ones. I can't remember them. Which films have Russell Brand in? They're both in season 2, I think. But you'll see understand what that means. But Russell Brand, so he's a celebrity and he's in our friend group, and he's not accepting worship at all. He's very, very humble. And despite him being mocked in the same way as somewhat the kids are being mocked a bit for thinking that he's Dan's famous when he's not. Yeah, so in that, it's not that he's not seeking worship, it's just that he doesn't get worship, I suppose, in the Russell Brand sort of scenario. Worship, I mean, being maybe a bit of a strong word to use there, but, he's part of our friends group and he's just really down to earth. He treats us the same as everybody else, despite him being a celebrity, multi-millionaire, all that kind of stuff. But he's just like one of the guys. Yeah. So, and this, as I said, it paralleled, but it was kind of like a real negative opposite of Dan accepting worship when he shouldn't even be worshipped at all because he's not anybody special. Unlike, the other example of, let's say, Russell Brand. If you consider celebrity to be that kind of thing, if you see what I mean there. Anyway, I won't spoil anything to do with that. Just watch. If I can find them, I'll put them in there. The Russell Brand ones, but they've got really great meaning. So he's unworthy of worship. So is he representing a somewhat antichrist figure in that he's looking to seek worship despite not really worthy of worship? That makes sense. I put here, Dan is in my dreams a lot, Daniel, and I tend to, as soon as I see that he's in my dreams, I start thinking on the basis of, okay, well, how does this fit in with Daniel the prophet in any way? Does it? Because I think at this point, because of all of my dreams, God's very aware that I'm making those connections now. So again, because I did, I started to notice things with Daniel tended to have the statue of Daniel, to do with Daniel, future events, prophetic events, that kind of stuff. Kingdoms to come, past kingdoms, all of that kind of stuff. So that's where my mind was tasked. I put here was my mind towards Daniel the prophet, and often the statue of Daniel. There we go. The future kingdom, the kingdom that will come, that will likely be a kingdom of, and this is me linking it in now to this dream. So that the future kingdom, a kingdom yet to come, is likely to be a kingdom of fear, and that it was apparent from this sort of Russian mob-like kind of thing, like this club, that it was all very, sadistic practices, done in the shadows. Obviously, you've got this woman being tortured, while everyone else was being entertained, which I think is key. So not hearing the terror of that woman, of course, nobody else was aware of it. I was only aware of it because I came out of that building. So could it relate to Gog of Magog? So because Magog is generally seen to mean Russia. Okay, it's just the area of Magog. There's even stuff where there's Russian archives and stuff like that actually relate it to Magog, even in their own records. But that is something that you can track back as to what the various nations are called in the past and what they are now. Examples would be, Tarshish, Cush, all of these. Yeah, again, I won't go and list all of them because I'll mess them up, believe me. But they all relate to modern areas that we would say, oh, that's Spain, or that's Sudan, or that's Ethiopia, or that's whatever it is, So Magog is one of those. It's named various times in the Bible, and you can track it back to the general area as to where it is, which is generally Russia. Okay, that sort of area. So interesting in this. So this is the Russian dude. He's the one who's I was aware was tormenting this woman. Okay, to destroy the woman. Well, the woman in the Bible is generally Israel, so representative of the woman, and that I've mentioned in. Not that I say it yet, but yeah, that is mentioned in the video called Future Exodus. If we had a tally of how many times I've directed people to that video, the woman, okay, and that came as a flash image at the end of the dream, and that linked it all in, the woman. Yeah, so the woman actually being a reference used many times, and the other people, those other people I was with, maybe representing the nations that are being entertained. They're not coming to her aid. She's out there, and she's being tortured, but no one's coming to her aid. So I put this may be a bit of a reach, but maybe the club being all glass, representing a surveillance state, maybe, a surveillance state where everything is on show, but the activities of these particular people was hidden. So it's kind of like you can be part of the system, and all the general public will be, but those elites, let's say, and I said these people are kind of like elites, well, they'll do stuff in the shadows. You won't see that, you know. Where are we? Yeah, activities hidden. Also the extortion element as well. So having to pay for photos. You're just out in a general environment and you're taking a picture and they want to bill you for photos. It's just, again, extortion. I also only noticed the problems that were going on were once I left the club. So it's almost like me leaving the system. Let's say coming outside of the system is when you can see it for what it really is from the outside. Which also makes me think about Christians and how they'll be outside the system because of the mark of the beast. So the mark of the beast, you know, if you want to buy or sell, you know, you want to be part of our society, well, then you've got to take the mark of the beast. Well, if you take the mark of the beast, you're going to be eternally damned. There will not be a point. There'll be no way that you can be redeemed by God. That's it. Game over. If you take that mark of the beast, what it will be called, who knows? And again, guess what? I've got a video called Mark of the Beast, Suffering Servant. I've also got the Beast system in effect. So I've got that one. There's probably been others, but again, I've linked people to those two dreams as well. Mark of the Beast and Beast system. Yeah, so I kind of saw that in effect, and especially the Mark of the Beast one is phenomenal as to how that looked. Again, not saying that's how it will be, but it's communicating an idea. Okay, so dreams are communicating ideas. Okay, so I'm not saying it's going to be exactly like that, but I have actually done a season 2 Mark of the Beast, which I actually showed just a screenshot of a film that I had actually mentioned in initial filming of the original one in season 1. I said, I've got a feeling it's really, really similar to a film I've seen. And then I actually managed to find that film. I couldn't find anything online. Like I couldn't find any pictures, any like short videos or anything to do with this Mark of the Beast thing. There's actually in this film called End of Days. But I have the film. I managed to find it. We've got like, I can't remember how many hundred DVDs we've got. We must have 500-600 DVDs, something like that. I managed to find it. And so I thought, right, brilliant, I'll watch it. So I watched it on screen. I was like, that's almost identical to what I saw. So I kind of sorry, I thought to myself, one of the videos I filmed this morning, I remember like a couple of pages over, I saw the pictures of it again. But yeah, so check that out, Beast system, the Mark of the Beast, all that kind of stuff. Moving on, so other points were that my friends were mocking Jesus randomly with childlike pictures, maybe representing what would be seen as a childlike understanding of Christ, you know, of Jesus. And the mocking culture that we have, obviously, over only Jesus, only Christianity gets mocked, no other religions get mocked. The truth is the one that's mocked, but everything else is protected by Satan to preserve the lie of all of these different other religions and stuff. Anyway, the meteor aspect then that came later. Meteor seemed to mean various different things. Actually, I'm going to quickly just go back a step because I did write some bits down as I was going around certain aspects. Terrorizing the woman, yeah, done that. Yeah, cover that bit off. Because I had a read through and I was like, oh, I wonder if that looks like new. That's new. Oh yeah, I suppose I mentioned here, I also mentioned in having a look this morning, me racing around in cars, and I was comparing with my friend. If you imagine, I was sort of saying, "Oh, you've got a bit bigger engine and stuff like that." Very much like us being very worldly. You know, I was in that worldly environment, let's say, of that club or that bar, and we were comparing possessions and stuff like that. It felt very worldly. Yeah, there's other bits I'll come back to, and all the flashing lights, the music, it's the very much like life is a big party, you know, you only live once, that kind of thing, that kind of attitude. I always said that was being demonstrated, which is, I've seen that communicated in dreams before, a very worldly environment, which I think is what that's also depicting there. Yeah, I've kind of talked about this, the whole, you couldn't hear what was going on outside. It reminds me of future persecution of Jews and Christians. I didn't actually talk about my faith at all. If you remember, I heard them in the bar sort of thing. They're mocking Jesus and stuff like that. I didn't actually speak out. I just left, and I wondered whether potentially, before I got further in actually to the dream, I wondered whether that girl, maybe she's representing Christians and Jews and stuff like that. But I think it's probably more Jews, given it's the woman. But it's the first step is the Jews, and then they move on to the Christians, I believe. Actually, I'm not sure with scripture. I might be getting that a little bit mixed up with a certain massive world religion who has a moon, let's say, and what their book says. So maybe I was keeping my faith a little bit quiet, because if I did speak out, well, then I could suffer the same fate as her, potentially. I think that's all I wanted to do on that little bit. So sorry, I'll carry on. I just didn't want to, because of obviously the second part of the dream is very, very different, where we're talking about this meteor coming in and all of that kind of stuff. So moving on to that part, then the meteor aspect, right? Okay, cool. So the meteor aspect came later, of course. So the meteor seemed to mean in my book, so I've looked it up. A meteor can mean a message from heaven, Jesus being the rock from heaven. Can mean judgment on the basis of one meteor. Many can represent. Oh, wait a minute. Can be judgment on the basis of one meteor. Many can signify. I think that's talking about like many meteorites coming down can be more judgment, but one, not so much. Maybe that's more what they're talking about here. So the message from heaven. It can be revival as well. So a message from God, or a judgment, let's say, given my house was struck in that environment, because I was back at home, wasn't I, and my daughter, and we were printing off the pictures and stuff like that. So could that represent the body? So because it was the house that was struck by this rock, could that represent my the body, as in our body's a temple kind of thing, that sort of thing? If that is the case, that's pretty concerning, obviously, especially if it means judgment. But interestingly, and probably just a coincidence, yeah. But I have been talking about the statue of Daniel. So the statue of Daniel actually gets hit by a rock from heaven, and that rock being Jesus, coming from, it talks about this rock that comes and smashes all of the nations. It hits the base of the statue of Daniel, which represents all the different empires that have been throughout history. Let's say from the Babylonians all the way through to, let's say, the current empire. And that all of these empires effectively will be smashed to bits by Jesus when he comes in, and that's how that that sort of whole part of Daniel is covered. But the what I go into here is it hits the feet. Okay, so that's what I'm getting at here to a certain extent, because if I'm going down the line of, is this a personal message for me? This rock that hits the foot of Daniel, because I've actually had an injury that's flared up that I haven't actually had since my early 20s. It happened when I was 20, 21, 22 max. And this all, it's my Achilles tendon, actually. I've mentioned it in a previous video, actually. It was a stupid drunken thing that happened, and I caused myself an injury, but I've had this pain since November 2025. It says here to present, which, when this was actually written into my book, was the 22nd of December. Yeah, 22nd of December, unless, is this talking about the dream? When did I say that dream was? No, that was October. Yes, I'm talking about this. Must be when I put it into my dream diary. But I don't really have it too much at the moment. It flares up occasionally. But November 2025 to present, where my Achilles tendon, I got an injury in my 20s. I tore it, but I basically didn't need to go to hospital. It just sort of repaired, but not properly repaired. But all I'll just mention with that is something where I kind of thought, well, is this injury that I've got like an injury to bear that kind of reminds me to a certain extent of my past, is what I kind of looked at it like. And in where I actually last mentioned that, I was talking about Abraham, where he kind of like pulls his hip, doesn't he? Pops his hip out of joint, and then he always, from then on, walks with a bit of a limp because he's wrestled with God. Okay, so I did mention that previously, and I suppose I'll note that again now. Wrestles with God. Yeah, I did mention that in a previous video, and I did wonder, and I even mentioned that on that video actually, was this kind of like my injury to sort of bear for the future as a reminder of my past, you know, in a similar way to Abraham. That might sound a bit dramatic. It probably does actually on reflection, but yeah, but we'll see. I'm also getting older, so obviously injuries and stuff like that start to sort of flare up as you get older anyway. But it happened at the same time as somebody from my church group had the same injury. It flared up in literally the same week. So I haven't had it for like 20 years. And it flared up in the same week that this guy that I didn't even know had the injury, I found out like a couple of weeks later, I think it was. And mine had started around about the same time. It happened before I found out. I was like, how weird. We got the same injury at the same time. And he was going to have surgery, and he didn't have surgery in the end, similar to me. But that was all I wanted to mention on that. I don't actually think that is what this is saying necessarily. I think it is all talking about future kingdoms and stuff like that, as I've already mentioned to a certain extent. I was wondering about the where. Yeah, okay, yeah, cool. Yeah, I was just looking to see if we were moving on from that. We are, right. So it is also put here, when that meteorite came through, and, you know, I looked through the hole and I saw the way that the clouds were sort of parted around this, you know, rock that had just come out of the sky. Is, you know, God is said to obviously to part the heavens as well, isn't he? And obviously the clouds, the sky is represented in the Bible as the heavens. And you get the various different heavens depending on what it's describing, whether it's describing our earthly heaven, and all that kind of stuff, you know, that sort of thing. But it caused this kind of tunnel, as I said, of like the blue sky I could see through the center, but around it was sort of swirled cloud, where it just come through with such force that it just kind of pulled it into this swirl as this rock went through, pushing the cloud out of the way. Yeah, so it's like a hollowed out cloud. And I'm not sure if I do mention it here, but because it looks like I'm going on here to talk about the dancing aspect. So before I finish, I'm going to go back to what I thought. I just realised I pulled out the bookmark. What did I go and do that for? Yeah, the book, right. Is that the one? Sorry. Where's it gone? Yeah, so what I thought it was could represent actually was this very strange cloud pattern in the sky. That it was circular like that. I actually said it was cylindrical tunnel, a little bit like a portal. Well, that in itself made me think of the rapture as almost like, you know, we're kind of taken up in the sky. We meet Jesus in the sky and we're taken to heaven. But I have had my third, I think it's Rapture 3, that's in my dream. You know, you'll find it in the Rapture series actually. Dream 3, there's this big cloud that kind of, it's like an explosion in the air that's not silent, but it's not loud either. And then there's this bright white light, and then I'm being, yeah, watch that video. But there's this round cloud. So that's where I kind of made that connection with the rapture. I was thinking, it's a rock that's smashing in, but it also looked a bit like a portal, because I'm going to take us down that kind of rapture route anyway with future videos. So that's what it kind of made me think of. I described it like a portal, like a cylindrical tunnel and stuff like that. And this rock had passed through. I'll go on to the dancing bit. So the dancing, so this has many meanings. So I looked up various different like dance bits that say in the dream book. But in this context of this sort of one, it was a very performative dancing. So break dancing, isn't it? It's very showy. I suppose all dancing is really to an extent. But I did notice that ballroom dancing is listed as meaning that I thought was the only one really that's relevant, was being led by the Spirit. because you're being led by a partner, aren't you? And you're partnering with a spirit, I guess, is what I'm presuming it means here. Well, if you remember, I found the foxtrot and tango and stuff like that all boring. So maybe it's a reference to me being more performative rather than being led by the spirit. Again, I don't really hold back too much. I can be quite self-critical, as you can see. So maybe that's what that's talking about. And I just have to be aware of that then. I've put not really sure of other aspects. One other aspect of the dream, talking about dancing, the person was called Diane. So I did look up the goddess Diana, because immediately I thought, Diana, of course. And that's Acts 19. So I haven't written down the scripture because there's quite a bit to it, but I'll put this in the description anyway. But she was basically, Diana was a goddess of the countryside. It seems it says here, possibly. So this is someone I've obviously looked up. Possibly a very old Italian deity initially, and then as did happen with a lot of the Greek and Roman cultures, they were somewhat mixed. They say, trying to think of an example. I can't think of an example, but it would be like, your God this is our God that, because of he's the God of war for us, and well, that one's the God, you've got a God of war as well. Okay, so they're kind of sort of interlinked to a certain extent. So because you've also got, because these mixed cultures, so the God of the Greeks would have been identified as another I can't even read what that says, right on the edge of the book where I'm writing. But there's, so it can be God of the Greeks and God of the Romans. It could be the same, but they just go by different names. So basically Diana became Artemis. And Artemis is obviously the one that's mentioned, I think, in Acts 19. But Artemis became the god of fertility, kind of like a mother goddess. But I put here, I couldn't see any other connection. Don't know the politics connection with Trump and that kind of aspect either. But I would have said there's somewhat a link here. So the other bit I mentioned was about the other person was called Francis. Okay, so now if we go back to the previous dream I mentioned, which was the one that was torpedo attack and the not so United Nations. So in that you had, in torpedo attack part, you had the US submarine. I was being attacked by a Russian submarine, and we had the UK as well. But in the not so United Nations, we also had Russia and France. So I thought Francis probably means France, because then we've got France, we've got Russia as well, again, and we've got the US because we've got Trump. So we've got those three nations again. And again, I'm not 100% sure if that's what it means, but we certainly had Russians, and we certainly had Trump for the US. Francis, it might be a little bit of a reach, but I thought maybe that's France. What it's indicating there? It's only one letter extra, Francis, Frances, exactly the same. That's the female version rather than is, which would be the male version, as I understand it. Certainly how she spelt it anyway, made me aware that that's, can't spell it is, it's es. Anyway, so that's what I thought maybe that was talking about, potentially. Was there any other thoughts here that I haven't already mentioned? I think that's mainly it. So I can't really see the connection so much with Trump, other than you said about political parties, wasn't he, not being the same, and he was watching this dancing, this performative bits and pieces that were going on from different people. I'm not sure really on the meaning of that as such, but so, but it's linking me in. As I said, it felt like it linked into the previous couple of dreams there, which were the not so United Nations and a torpedo attack, which was a separate dream entirely. There was another one I added in there, which was talking about a ceasefire, a peace coming, something like that, which I linked into potentially being spiritual warfare, maybe, but it could equally be, based on the fact that there's a lot of wars and stuff, a lot of bits and pieces going on at the moment, could be linking in with that. So that's where I'll leave it. I think it is talking about the statue of Daniel, potentially, because of the rock that comes in, shoots in. That does hit the foot of the statue Daniel, which is Jesus. Again, we see the rock here. It links up in the dream meaning, the same kind of stuff there. And as it goes, that torpedo attack one was the next dream in my book. So that was the 17th of October. And this dream was the 16th, so it was literally the next day. I had a torpedo attack one, which also had Russia and the US and the UK. I think I represented, or the area I was in represented the UK. So I think it's all talking about conflict, future conflict and stuff like that, possibly. And obviously this one talking about the kingdom to come, let's say surveillance state, you know, well, the killing of the, you know, what's it called? You know, the attacking against Israel, which happens from Magog, which is Russia, and a lot of the surrounding nations, which I've mentioned in, I go through quite a lot of detail in that, in the one called Gathering Storm, which I actually mentioned in that previous video as it goes. And I said, if you remember, or if you saw it, I said, oh yeah, Russians involved, and I did actually start writing about Gog, Magog, that kind of thing, and I thought, no, I'm not going to take it in that direction. And then I just sort of said, just watch Gathering Storm. Well, there we go. I'm saying it again. It does go through quite a bit of detail in that one. So that's where I'll leave this one. It is a long one. I was going to fit 4 dreams into one, but I quite quickly realised when reading this through, that was never going to happen. So this was it. Now this, I think, is pretty much the penultimate video. I might have one more, maybe 2, but that's maximum, I would think now at this point. Okay, so I'm going to see if I can get this all finished, and we'll have the whole season comes to a close. Right, that's it. I'll go on to the next one.